This is Supercharge your skills with creative coding. I'm Jhey Tompkins, a developer relations engineer at Google, and without further ado, here we go. Take the lowly input type range. You know the one. You grab a thumb, you update it to select a value. But what could you do with it? Well, with CSS accent color, you're able to change the theme of various controls with one line of CSS. So here, I've updated our input to have a green thumb. And the neat part is the track will update automatically for you. So now we have a dark track. But what else could you do with it? What if you took the value of the input and then mapped that to an accent color hue? So here, the hue is changing from a red through to a yellow, an orange, and then up to a green. And you can see how the track is automatically changing based on the hue or the color through our accent color. And this got me thinking, what if I placed this on its side? It kind of looks like one of those EQ bars for audio visualization. So I thought, could I make that? And I did. So these are all input type range without the thumbs. I've styled it so the thumbs aren't there, and it uses the media recorder API to process the audio input from my mic, convert that to values, set those values on the inputs, and then update the accent color depending on the value of the input. And then we get this neat little audio visualization, which leads me on to my definition for creative coding. I like to think of it as expression through the impractically practical. Yes, I'm not going to drop this into production anytime soon, but I learned a lot from it. So it was practical for me. I learned about the media recorder API, how to style different controls with new CSS properties such as accent color, and how to do things like remove the thumb. I picked up quite a bit from making this demo. And this leads me onto an obvious point. It's important to remember that you are not me. We both have different perspectives. How you think something might look could be completely different to how I think something might look. And that's what's great. We're able to share these ideas over the web and be creative together in a collaborative way. Which leads us on to the what, the how, and the why. Why are you making CSS art? Well, it's because I want to be able to become more confident with CSS, and CSS art is one way to do that. It enables you to play with different layouts, different properties that you might not necessarily use in your day-to-day, and it gives you something fun to do. But we're not dwelling on the why today, because we know why. And the how. How are you going to do it? Well, we try not to think too much about the how either. We're just focusing on what it is we want to make. The limit is your imagination. You need to deviate from that usual thinking of why are you doing it and how are you going to do it, and more about what idea is it I'm going to bring to life. And these are some of those ideas that I've brought to life. You may have seen some of them before. This leads on to why. Well, supercharge your learning. If you're watching this talk, you know that I've titled it Supercharge Your Learning with Creative Coding, so this one's a given. But an important one is go beyond the docs. Typically, documentation shows you a happy path from A to B, a common solution for, say, a common problem. But what happens when your problem isn't documented? You've come up with some idea that you want to bring to life, but it isn't documented anywhere how to do it. Well, creative coding gives you an avenue to become a better problem solver, and that skill is transferable to your day-to-day. You shouldn't be limited by your tech stack, but instead be limited by your imagination. We aren't able to just do yarn add super obscure thing or yarn add this particular UI component, but in React, although with React you maybe can. But that's what's great about skilling up in this way of solving problems. If something doesn't exist, you'll be able to make it. You're essentially future-proofing yourself on the web platform. The fact that you can build with different fundamentals enables you to context switch into different stacks, and as things evolve, you'll be able to change with the times. I'm still coming up with a good visualization for this, But I like to think that perspective fuels creativity, which fuels innovation. A good example of this is the mobile phone. When the mobile phone first landed, it was a big old weighty thing that you carry around in a case. And we could have just left it there and said, it's been done. Let's leave it at that. It works. But we didn't. People got creative and they had different perspectives on things, and that led to innovation. And now we're able to carry a phone in a pocket, or it has a touchscreen, or you're able to make a payment with it. It's incredible, and that all came from different perspectives, leading to creativity, which innovated things further. Make for yourself. Make things that interest you, that spark your curiosity. Make the ideas that you want to see come to life. I could have wrote Be Selfish here, but instead I animated a pufferfish because I thought that would be fun. But it's true. Make things for yourself. You're more than a to-do app, although there's nothing wrong with to-do apps. They're almost a rite of passage these days, but don't be afraid to show a bit of personality, a bit of flair, make something that interests you or solves a problem for you. These things you see in the backdrop are things that I wanted to make because I was curious about how I might solve that problem, and they're all little tools or things that I've found useful at some point in time or still do. For example, the top right is a picture of my GitHub commit graph at some point in time because I made an app that allows me to draw images onto my GitHub commit graph. And it was a fun project and I learned a lot from it. And I still use it today. So how are we going to do this? Take these 5 bullet points, 5 random bullet points, and think, what would you make with them? Is that enough time? This is to emphasize that our perspectives are different, but also the limit is your imagination. We're not talking about how you're going to make it here. We're just talking about what is it you'd want to make. So for me, I've left one in here that has a bit of a hint, but hovercraft, the colons are a big giveaway. It would have been a CSS illustration where you hover and the hovercraft animates, and I'd create a little rendering of a hovercraft. But your take on it might have been completely different, which is great. And with your ideas, you have to train them. Write them all down. Write them wherever you like, Trello, Notion, Post-its, but write them down. And no idea is a bad idea, and I've repeated that on purpose. Just because you're not going to make something today or an idea you've had you're not particularly keen on at the moment, doesn't mean you might not use it months down the line or it might spark some other idea. It's just great to document all these different things. So where do you get your inspiration from? Well, you can get it from anywhere. Even outside, I know. But Muesli is a great little browser extension that shows you design inspiration, and maybe you could do something seasonal or something topical. But you can genuinely get inspiration from a lot of places. I can give you stories for almost, I'd say, a majority of the 1,400 plus CodePens I've built, because they've all been inspired by something, and I thought, I'm going to give that a go. A typical response to extracurricular coding or creative coding is, I just don't have time. When am I ever going to do that? But the great thing about creative coding is it can take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 days, a week, 4 months. It's up to you how long it takes. You can just tinker with it when you feel like it. Some of the demos I'll show you today, some of them took 5 minutes and some of them took a painstaking 12 hours trying to solve my problem. But it was all worth it, and that was up to me. I wanted to do it. Why 10 lifetimes though? Well, you need to get okay with the idea that as you collect all these ideas and different things you want to bring to life, you'll probably need 10 lifetimes to make them all. And now we're back to the thought of the what, the how, and the why. We know the why in this context. We want to scale up and bring our ideas to life, so banish the thought of why and don't dwell on the how. We're not too worried about the how because the how is the bonus, right? We think about what it is we want to make and then we think, how could I do it? What could I try out? And that's the part where we skill up. And with that, it's example time. I'm part of the CSS, UI and DevTools team, and usually for this talk I like to do a section on CSS, UI and then DevTools, but today we're just going to be looking at CSS. Maybe next time for the others. In particular, we're going to be looking at CSS has today, which is coming down the pipeline in CSS. And today's demos will be in Chrome Canary behind the experimental web platform feature flag. Where was my inspiration? Well, social media, a recent team offsite we had, and an arcade we spent a little bit of time in. But how did I solve today's problems? Well, I started having a play with has because I was curious about it and I wanted to know what was possible. And honestly, let me tell you, has is a game changer. So here's some of my inspiration. Here are some clips of us in the arcade, and here's a picture of us at our team offsite. And as you can see, Has's support is not great at the moment, but it's getting there. It will be here. And Brahms has written an article about Has as well, which is definitely worth checking out. So how does Has look? Well, we want to target an element that has some selector or some environmental condition, is how I like to think of it. So you're able to target an element based on its environment, whether it has a child or some sibling or a distant sibling. For example, if within the body anywhere we had an element with an ID ref of red that was checked, then we could target body and set the background to red. I know, we need to flip the thinking. So, for a different example, we could have an element with the class everyone and an element with the class a good time. And if the element with a class a good time is within the element with a class everyone, then we could say everyone has a good time and then set an animation on the element with class everyone, in this case a party for the duration of around an evening. But as we can see, the bottom example of markup wouldn't select the element with class everyone because it doesn't contain an element with the class a good time. So how about a has primer? And what better way than using memes? Because it is one way we communicate these days, right? So we're going to use a classic. ICANN has cheeseburger, and it's about a cat and a cheeseburger. And here I'm using an element and I'm using emojis for class names. And then based on the conditions, I'm going to update the content property of a pseudo element to reflect what is happening. So in this example, our cat has a distant sibling of an element with the class cheeseburger. So the cat is frowning because he wants the cheeseburger and it's too far away. So he frowns. We've updated that pseudo element content and we're using the distant sibling combinator. But when the cheeseburger gets closer, it's a direct sibling, then the cat is anticipating it. So we've set an animation on the cat element because the cheeseburger is now a direct sibling. So the cat pseudo element gets the animation anticipate because cat has a cheeseburger as a direct sibling. And then cat gets cheeseburger. So the cat element now has a child of the cheeseburger element, and we style the pseudo element of the cat with the animation, and we show that the cat is satisfied and happy. Did that make it any clearer? Right, let's do some more examples. And before that, we need to remember, you need to break the mental model. We're going to flip things around. When we're thinking of CSS, we're normally cascading down. But now with has, we're able to go up and to the side and in different directions. So hopefully these examples will help. Let's start with forms. Typically, styling a label and an input together can be quite tricky. If we wanted to style them both based on the state of an input, say whether it's valid or invalid or empty. It usually requires some kind of markup structure or the intervention of JavaScript. But with CSS has, we don't actually need to do this anymore. So we could say if label has a direct sibling that is invalid, then we could set both of them to red. And let's see this in action. So if I set error at and we blur it, everything went red. But if we set a valid email, let's do google.com, then it goes green because now our input is valid and we're setting the color to green and a border color of green. But we can take this further. What if we wrapped each part of our form into these form groups, and then we could update a scoped custom property based on the state of our inputs? For example, what if form group has a valid input, then change a scoped custom property to a color that then gets applied to anything that's within the form group? So if we were to update the color and say the label and border color and the outline color of our input changed. So we could change our value here to valid, and we could see how everything changes how we want it to. But the bonus piece here is that we are also saying that form group in this scenario has a valid, but then target the sibling of the form group, which is type submit, and set the color of that too to show that it is valid. So when it wasn't, it was gray, and then when it was, it went green. And there's no JavaScript involved here. This is just CSS and HTML. As I said, this is a game changer. And if you wanted to take it a little bit further, you could. So if you split the label into spans for each letter, you could animate them if you really wanted to. So in this example, I'm saying when my form group is valid, then set an animation on the spans within the label. So watch the label closely. Are you ready? They all do a neat little twirl. Isn't that nice? You could also do something obnoxious though. If you set an error, you could make your label bounce, although I probably wouldn't recommend doing that one anytime soon. But again, we're showing possibilities with Has, and it's really exciting what you can do with it, and we're really hoping you're going to give it a try and see what use cases you can come up with. And this leads on to a different use case for Has. I don't foresee this one maybe being used much, but again, it might spark something for you where you think, I could actually use it in this way, and then you could show us. So here I'm targeting the root. And what I'm saying is when the root has an element with the class revealer that is active, then update a custom property at the root level that can then be used by other elements in the page. And you can see by the markup that our revealer element is a button that is somewhere in the DOM. And what we're going to do is we're going to show the classic secret message, like an ultraviolet message. So here's my button, and when I press down on it, I get to see these secret messages, and I had to shoehorn a cow in there, so has a cow. But yeah, take my finger off, and the property returns to its previous value. Again, just a use case to get those ideas generating. Which brings us on to a more practical example of Has, and this one could quickly become the poster child of Has. So cards with media. So here I have a basic card. It has a nice little border around it and a title and a blurb. And it's just a card element, display grid, nothing magic is happening. But what if I was to introduce some media, an image? Well, I've not changed any classes here. I've just introduced an image element. And there's no JavaScript at play. We haven't done anything crazy with the structure. But because now card has an image, I could update the grid template. So I'm updating the columns, so now I have 2 columns. And I'm manipulating things slightly, but there's no JavaScript intervention, or I'm not having to do anything funky with my markup, like wrapper elements or anything. I'm just saying, move things around because my card now has an image and I need to shuffle things, please. And you can take this further. So you could do that and then add a feature banner, or you could detect a certain type of source. Here I'm saying, right, my card has a feature banner. I want to change the border color to a red, and then I want to do a little wiggle because it's a featured card and I want people to see it. So there it is. And the neat thing with has is that because you're able to do things that you would typically do with JavaScript, such as state something is happening or has happened, well, the clue is in that wording. Now you're able to do it with CSS. You'll be able to say, does something have something or has something happen? Whereas previously we'd be juggling class names around, and that can lead to sometimes user error unless your classes are, say, defined in an object and you can use them. Will it be goodbye checkbox hack? I don't think so. But it does make for an interesting conversation when you start pushing these CSS demos. So typically the checkbox hack, if you're not familiar with it, is to detect a checked pseudo element and then use a sibling combinator to do something with some sibling. But with has, you're able to do semantic markup and magic CSS tricks and powers. And it's really, really exciting. There's so many possibilities, and we really would love you to try it out. So let's dig into some other examples while we're here. So take the classic nav draw. You could do this with a little smidge of JavaScript. So although the JavaScript isn't necessary, I'm using it here to do the update of an ARIA expanded attribute to say that the menu is expanded or it's not expanded. But the cool thing is I'm not having to use any class names here. So now I can say if the root has ARIA expanded true, then I know that the draw is meant to be open. And what I'm doing is I'm using a custom property like a Boolean between 1 and 0, and then I can set a translation on a draw, or the body in this case. So when root has ARIA expanded true, shift the body across, and we can see that in action. There it is. The only thing here is you don't get a light dismiss, and normally you would want one where you click off and then it would close. You would need to add that with JavaScript, but pop-up is coming, and that will allow you to do some of these things without any JavaScript, and that's also a very exciting thing coming. So stay tuned for that one. And it wouldn't just have to be a nav drawer, you could do something like a dark mode as well. You could do root has ARIA pressed true and use a button like a toggle. And then you could update some theme variables. So again, just to emphasize that your controls can live anywhere in the DOM, and you can just detect them from the root. And then you can combine them. So you could have a nav and a dark mode toggle, or a theme toggle, or whatever you like. But you're able to do it without JavaScript. You're not juggling class names. We're just changing some ARIA attributes and then doing what we want. But now we can move on to the wildly experimental pieces which you should not drop into production. But they are fun to look at, and they might show you some of the wild possibilities we have with CSS coming. So this particular example, you may have seen it or you may have not, but here I'm using object viewbox, which is a property which would allow you to set the viewbox on a media element such as an image or a video. And I'm using some properties and values API from Houdini to transition some values for object viewbox. And then I'm using has to detect which values from our radio button in this case are checked. So here I have an image and I'm saying that it has an object viewbox, and object viewbox uses an inset, so inset top, right, bottom, left. And then what I'm doing is when a particular thing is checked, I can update those custom property values to hit zoom spots on the image. And then I'm going to use @property to transition those values. So if we see this in action and we hit bus, we zoomed in on a bus. And then I can use my keyboard to navigate through the controls and do the different zooms, which is pretty fascinating how these primitives allow us to do something like this with very little code and no JavaScript or class updates. It's really exciting. But if we take it further than that, I wanted to see if I could recreate a CSS game I created previously, which was CSS Tic-Tac-Toe. And the answer is, you can. And I found out stuff by doing it. So you could do everything with has for the majority, but you still need some sibling combinator kind of trickery and moving inputs slightly around. Dig into the code if you like. But what I did find from doing this is that you can't has a has. You can't nest a has in a has, so you need to find other ways around it. For example, I couldn't do board has a board cell that has something checked. I had to actually shuffle things around, but I was able to do interesting things like, say, if the board has, say, a certain combination checked. So if 0, 2 is checked, 0, 4 is checked, 0, 6 is checked, then I know that noughts have 1, and then I can use custom properties to show certain pieces of UI again, like Boolean operators. So does it work? Well, I guess I can have a game with myself and let's find out. So 0, cross, 0, cross, 0. Let's have crosses win. And there's a winner. So it does work. No JavaScript again, just CSS and some SVG in this case. So that's CSS has. We've learned what has can do. We thought about whether it would be bye to the checkbox hack, and we saw that there's more opportunities for less JavaScript, and in turn that could mitigate user error, and it could make for cleaner markup, which is really nice. There's so much you could do with has, and we're still exploring things, and I'm still finding new things all the time that I'm thinking, wow, that would be really great with has. So please give it a try. Please reach out with ideas and yeah, let us know what you think. So where did I go with this? Well, I had to make a few different things because I wanted to show you something cool at the end of this talk. So my first one is a dark mode toggle with has that has a slight different touch on it. So this is a little random lorem ipsum site, but when I hit the dark mode, I'm actually going to flip a load of custom properties and you're going to get this. A 3D dark mode toggle, which I think is pretty cool. So yeah, no JavaScript involved, but you get that 3D perspective and that flip. But that isn't the winner. So you may remember back we were talking about inspiration and arcade games. Well, you haven't seen any arcade games because I haven't seen Tic-Tac-Toe in an arcade. But what did I make? Well, this is Hishi Hashi Stan. It's a game made just from CSS using a little bit of Houdini and has, and you're able to, you have to hit the buttons to wake Stan, and yeah, let's give it a whirl. So you click the buttons as quick as you can, no JavaScript involved, and as you do it, we're updating different custom properties on the document element, and there we go. You win, and there's a stopwatch as well, and I wrote an article about that too. So 11 seconds, not too bad. I'm sure you can do better though. So that's it, almost. Explore and find things you want to make. Hoard all your ideas and collect them, and when inspiration hits, go off and make them and see what happens for you. And profit felt like, I don't know, the right thing to end on, right? So what next? Over the course of this conference, or whenever you can, jot down a few ideas. Let's say 5. And you don't have to go off and make them, but just think, what is possible? What's possible with this incredible thing we have access to, the web platform? At the end of the day, it is all just pixels. Your only limit is your imagination. And with that, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the talks.
Hello once again, dear friends, and shout out to Jhey Tompkins for his great tech lecture. So Jhey, should we check some of the questions from the chat? I think they're kind of nice. And the first one I
Cool.
would like to start is where do you get those ideas for your demos from? They're super creative and nicely designed. Do you design them by yourself or do you use something else?
It's something you definitely skill up on over time. Like it takes time, as mentioned in the talk, right? The inspiration comes from a variety of different sources, and it's something you definitely train over time to be able to generate a whole idea, a whole demo out of, say, a couple of keywords. The
Yeah.
design part of it is something you definitely kind of train over time too. Like I mean, if we go back and look at some older demos, they're not gonna be as nicely designed. I'll say that for sure.
Yeah. Thank you on that. I think our the one who asked the question got her answer. I think the next one you already bring it up in the chat, but I do think this is a really nice question, especially for me. Do you consider the creative coding a form of learning or rather a form of art?
And I think I answered with both, right? So,
Yeah, I
but
think
it's both. It's a way to kind of express yourself and lean into the things that interest you, that spark your kind of curiosity or motivate you. But also, if it wasn't for creative coding, and if it wasn't for pursuing these things, I wouldn't have skilled up in the way that I have and learned all the different things I have, because I'm not following documentation. You see, I'm going off and I'm thinking, right, how can I make this? And it's kind of led to, well, where I am now. So if it wasn't for that and a platform of like sharing it and just sharing ideas and seeing what people are up to and riffing off of that, and it's kind of enabled me to scale up. Like I was a contractor and a freelancer for years, and it made me kind of really able to adapt to different things. And it's kind of, yeah, it's just gone on from there. So it is the impractically, but very practical. So
By the way, one aside question from my end. A long time ago, I was a dancer and a choreographer. Have you participated in some kind of art? I mean, music, dances, wherever.
As soon as people mention dance, I like to say it's a really non-interesting fact, but I actually studied dance when I was at school.
Oh,
But
nice.
yeah, I done like I used to do BMX and stuff and like extreme sports and things like that, and I do a lot of like gymnastic stuff, but not really art. Like I never was able to play music. It was something that really interested me, but I never really was able to do it. I do the occasional bit of like yo-yo and stuff like that, but yeah, I don't know. Just this is my art. This is my creative expression right here. So
Nice. Nice. I mean, you know, art is not about the professionalism, as I think. It's more about your expression.
it's subjective anyway, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, right. So okay, I think the next question is there a Webpack loader what changed any CSS class name with emojis?
whoa, as in transform them. I mean, emojis are a valid class name, which is one that was always interesting. So the code that was actually used in those demos works. I actually, well, all the demos work. All the slides are built in HTML, CSS, and JS. So the whole thing is web platform built. But there probably is. There probably is something that will escape them, or some kind of post CSS transformer that would do it, I imagine. But for this, it was just raw CSS. There's no transformations happening. So, but yeah, definitely. I imagine there's a post CSS thing that will do it.
Okay, thank you so much. I think I got only one last question since the other one is actually for me. Well, I'm gonna dance today. Well, I don't know. Maybe.
Take it away.
Yeah. But the last question, I guess, from you, for you, Jay, is what the best way to integrate all these great tricks and animations into boring industrious companies like banking, insurance, tax, whatever? Someone already mentioned that Dia already did that in Ukraine, and that's true. But maybe you have some tips and tricks for non-Dia services.
This is always a really interesting one actually that comes up because, and one thing I always say in like my talks, or I try to shoehorn it in there, is there's always space for a bit of whims. There are certain benefits to it, and there is certain, like, if you can find a good balance, it actually has a lot of wins. So things like audio and like small micro animations and those kind of things actually do in some cases improve user experience and like help people or make people want to use a product more. So for example, there's a great YouTube account. I think it's Mike Boyd, and one thing that always stuck with me, like he did a thing where he was talking about, like, I'm pretty sure it was like a to-do app. Every time he crossed a to-do off, he got like this little audio bite that would play, and it's almost like gamification. I want to hear that noise again, so I do it again, and it's
Okay.
kind of that kind of balance, right? You're kind of gamifying UIs, UX, and it kind of lures people in more. They're like, oh, I want to do some more on this. What else is? So it's tricky, but you need to kind of, if you're in those kind of industries, trying to kind of show the benefits of it, right? And it won't just happen from 0 to 100 overnight, I'm sure. But
Yeah, yeah, right. But you know, not always, stakeholders and business understand that sometimes you need to incorporate that. I think I can say gamification, right? This fun stuff into the application, because it's one thing to use something, plain and simple that is just do its job, and the other thing when
so I
it's
saw sorry, it just came to. I saw a great talk last week when I was at Pixel Pioneers, and someone did a
yeah,
talk
yeah,
on delight in design, and they brought up all these great examples of like delight in design. They don't have to be like really in your face, but there was a real one that stuck with me, and it was a site that I can't exactly remember what the product was, but they had a thing that when you got through the user journey, they gave you a paper airplane template that you could print and create and like fly, which was like, that's really cool. Like, it's not flashy, but it's just a little added touch, and you'll remember that every time you visit that site or every time you go through that flow. And it's like, what you're doing is you're making yourself stand out. You're more memorable to people. Like, we consume so much information all the time, all these different sites we go on, and if you see something that delights you, it's more likely to stick around in your memory, and you'll be like, oh, I remember that thing I went to. Like, what was it? And you're more inclined to kind of share it around. So
But by the way, is this from a talk, right? Can you share the link for this one? I think it's kind of interesting.
I don't think it's live yet, but it was
Oh,
Pixel
okay.
Pioneers. It only happened on Thursday, so on Friday, so the videos haven't gone live yet. But yeah, it was really good. It was Chris Howe, did a great talk. I'm not sure if he'll be watching, but it was a great talk. But yeah,
Nice.
I'm sure those talks will go live eventually.
Nice. I think we have just one last question, and I think we're gonna wrap up on this one. How much time does one need to spend coding creatively to feel a benefits of it? By the way, the really, really nice question. When the style or art became your superpower, when it help you in your professional career, because we are engineers, right? Not that kind of art you think of, but still it's art. So
It is an
what do
art.
you think? Yeah, what do you
Definitely.
think? How much do we need to spend?
So it's kind of an interesting one because I think you can kind of, I mean, it's a personal thing, right? It's kind of up to people how much time they want to spend, but you can spend as little time or as much time. So for me personally, I didn't start with visual stuff at all. I don't have a design background. I started as a middleware engineer, doing Java. And then I got like this bug because I was like, I wonder how I make a loading spinner. A loading spinner takes a matter of minutes once you've seen like a simple keyframe, a spin, and it's like, oh wait, I can rotate a div and I can do it on the web platform in a browser without an IDE. Like, this is crazy. And then you kind of get that bug and you're like, what can I make next? What can I make next? And a minute spans to 10 minutes, spans to an hour, and before you know it, you get hooked on doing all these kind of things. And as mentioned before, like all these things are transferable. They're all like, as you scale up on these different things, you think, how will I solve that? Well, I did some demo at some point and I picked up a technique that I used, and now I use it on other things. So it actually makes, for example, making the demos for these different talks, actually, well, I mean, I try and challenge myself in each one, but there are a lot of things I picked up along the way, which I'm able to use because I've done stuff in the past. So it's like, it comes in handy all the time. It might not seem like the one-off demos are particularly useful. For example, in the talk, the audio visualization stuff, like I'm probably not going to be using that anytime soon, but I learned a lot from it because I've learned like how to use different APIs on the web platform and new things in CSS and how to do different styling things, which are all really useful because we all style forms and things on the web, and yeah, it all ties in. So yeah, I could talk all day about it.
Yeah, I think that the proper, I mean, not proper, but right question is whether you should start, and answer is yes, right? And it's gonna increase.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
okay, Jhey, thank you a lot for your talk, for your questions, and for all your vibes. And dear listeners of the DevFest for Ukraine, please big shout out to Jhey in the chat, and stay tuned.